We discuss power today. So create a sort of situation to understand what is power. There is a common way in which we use the word power, power of one person or an organization over or a country over another person, organization or country, to force them to do something that they may not necessarily want to do, because they can then do something to them that is even more terrible or difficult than doing something that you don't want to do. That's the way in which we use power in terms of human relationships or society's relationships. But power in physics, of course, is something very specific. The situation that I would like to talk about is a couple of friends go down a hill for a walk. So you start off, you go down for a hill for a walk, and you reach the bottom of the hill. One of you remembers that you have a meeting. The time now is 4:30, and you realize you have a meeting at 4:45. So you say, I got to rush. There is a meeting that I need to attend, so I'm going to run up. You come back on your own, and one person runs up the hill and the other person walks up the hill. Now, if the elevation from the bottom to the top is about approximately 100 meters and your masses are equal, both of you are about 50 kilograms, then the person who ran up and the person who walked up both gain the same amount of gravitational potential energy. The work that you do against gravity is exactly the same. M1GH is equal to M2GH. Because the masses are equal, of course, the gravitational potential and the height gained is exactly the same. Sorry, the gravitational constant and the height gained is exactly the same. So both of you end up doing 50,000 joules of work. You can write that as 50 kilojoules. Incidentally, just using that quantity, 50 kilojoules. But then, in terms of the experience of these two people, the first person who ran up the hill, of course, feels more tired, if only momentarily, than the second person. The second person had a nice jolly stroll up the hill. The first person, the thigh muscles hurt, you're sweating a lot, you're huffing and puffing. So the question is now, if the work done is exactly the same for both cases, why does the first person feel more tired than the second person? And naturally, the question that comes is the question of time. The first person obviously took lesser time than the second person to complete the work. And that gives us the clue as to what has happened when the work is the same. Why does the person feel more tired? Looking at it biologically, the person who ran uphill, both of them are spending energy. So both of them are doing that Krebs cycle ATP process, converting energy into ATP form. But I think you would have studied this also in biology. One of them is probably doing anaerobic respiration. Is that the correct term?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? And the other one who is walking up slowly is doing aerobic respiration. That means you are using lesser amount of oxygen and a less efficient conversion to ATP. You are producing lesser amount of ATP, but you are doing it very quickly. So the oxygen is less, but you are producing more ATP. Whereas the other person is producing the appropriate amount of ATP, but with enough oxygen. And that is the difference in terms of the biological processes. So the reason why the body goes into anaerobic respiration is because there is an urgency. You need to very quickly convert your stored energy into useful energy forms, right? And there again, the question of time comes into the process. So simply speaking, the amount of work that is done by the first person has been done in a shorter period of time. So if you look at it in terms of the rate at which work is done. So we bring this another concept in it, that is rate of doing work. Okay, there is a difference between these two. My red marker is so stupid. Okay, I'm shifting to the blue marker. So what do you mean by the rate of doing work? Both of them are doing work, both of them are converting energy. But let us say, give me some nice numbers for T1 and T2 in terms of seconds. Nice numbers means you should understand something that divides neatly with 50,000. And that also makes, let's say 50 seconds. Is it doable? Running uphill within a minute? I think it can be done. Or is it too much?
It's too much.
Too much? Okay. 100 seconds?
Yeah, I think that's better.
That's doable. Okay. It takes me about 6 to 7 minutes to do that. So I'm really pushing it over here. 100 seconds, is it doable? Is there somebody who has done it in 100 seconds? The distance is kind of like about a little over a kilometer, I think. Just up to the second check.
So I think you should keep it 150.
150?
I think it's not doable because you'll have to run 10 meters per second at least.
Exactly, that's like Olympic
You
sprint
say
level.
that too uphill.
Okay. So, okay, let's say 500 seconds. That's still quite a,
Yeah, that's about
average. Buff. And let's say the other person does it in what? 2,500 seconds. Because they are really taking it easy. Four times as slower. No, not 4 times, 5 times as slower. Okay. So now to talk in terms of the rate of doing work, person 1, right? The rate at which he or she is converting energy is 50,000 joules in 500 seconds. Okay. And that amounts to 500 joules per second. Okay, while person 2 is doing the same thing, 50,000 joules in 2500 seconds, which amounts to what? 50, right? 50 joules per second. Am I right? Is the math correct?
But wait, shouldn't P1 be 100 joules per second?
Sorry, you're right. 100 joules per second. Yes, correct. When I'm doing things on the board, sometimes I kind of it's not the same as doing it on pen and paper for myself. I'm aware that people are watching, so sometimes I make errors like that. Are both the calculations right now?
So P2 should be 20 joules per second.
Thank you. Okay. I can just say tongue in cheek that I was checking if people were paying attention or not, but of course that was not the case. It was a genuine mistake. So you can see that the rate at which the person 1 was converting energy was 5 times as much as the rate at which the person 2 is converting energy. And that is the reason why he or she requires anaerobic respiration processes. Okay. And that is the reason why the person feels tired. Okay, because then the rate of building up of the lactic acid in your muscles and so on becomes more when you are doing anaerobic respiration in this case. So that is what we talk in terms of the power expended. So we say that the power expended by person 1, so I'll just erase some of this other parts. Is 100 joules per second for the first person and 20 joules per second for the second person. Now this unit joules per second is abbreviated to watt. So when 1 joule is converted per second from some form of energy to another form of energy, we say that the power expended is 1 watt. And watt is abbreviated to capital W, don't put small w. The same thing applies for joule. It's capital J, not small j. And this watt is, of course, in honor of James Watt, the inventor of the steam engine. And that brings us to the unit of power expended. So we say that the power is measured in watts, where 1 watt is 1 joule being converted into another form of energy per second. So if there are any doubts or questions now, you can raise it. So therefore you can say that in this case, P1 expends 100 watts while P2 expends 20 watts. Okay, you don't need to write it as joules per second. In honor of James Watt, they gave it its own unit. So power is measured in watts. And of course, that brings us to the way in which we calculate power. Power is work done divided by time taken to do that work. So P is equal to W upon T. Okay, so there may be some very simple numerical problems which may be given based on this formula in mechanics section, and then later when we do electricity, there is an electrical equivalent also to power. We will study that when we come to that, but the concept of power, I hope now is clear. So a single watt, I'm just repeating part of this, a single watt is actually 1 joule per second, which is a small amount of power expended. Typically we talk in terms of kilowatts, megawatts or gigawatts depending upon what the application is. In terms of electricity generation, we talk in terms of megawatts, gigawatts. In terms of people running up the stairs and reaching the top of a building, etc., etc. These are the kind of typical numerical problems you are given. We will mostly be dealing with things in terms of kilowatts. The textbook also talks in terms of microwatts and what else? Microwatts and milliwatts. You can look at it in the textbook. I don't remember any question being asked about microwatts and milliwatts, but the textbook gives the appropriate units for that. So now let's talk in terms of the CGS units. What is the CGS unit for power? It's a rarely asked question in terms of what is the CGS unit for power, but since CGS is involved in our syllabus, might as well have a discussion about that. 1 watt is the conversion of 1 joule per second into usable form. 1 joule is equal to 10 power 7 ergs. So 1 watt therefore is equal to 10 power 7 ergs per second. In other words, there is no special unit for power in CGS. It is simply written in terms of work done per unit time. Okay, I think you just only need to know this. Nothing else. Rarely asked question. I don't remember in the last 4 or 5 years that they had asked anything to do with power in terms of ergs per second, but it just helps to know so that you know how to work it out. Then your textbook talks in terms of horsepower. So there is a small history to this. Why do we talk in terms of horsepower? Have you come across the term horsepower or HP somewhere?
Yeah. In
Yeah.
car engines.
Where?
In cars.
In cars, automobiles, you people would have typically come to know about it in terms of automobiles. For example, in my days, when I was a younger man, the most powerful production motorcycle that was there was this motorcycle called the Yamaha RX 100. Okay, it was a 2-stroke, highly polluting motorcycle, but we were very excited about it because it could produce a lot of power. So the power that it could produce was approximately 8 HP, if I am not mistaken. I don't remember it very well. This motorcycle is no more in production, but it is something of a collector's item nowadays. Some people like to rebuild this RX 100 or 110 and use it now and then. It's a gas guzzler. In those days, petrol used to cost 20 rupees per liter. So it didn't matter so much. We used to fill in the petrol and enjoy ourselves. But in today's date, we have motorcycles which are far more, production motorcycles which are far more efficient than that. I'm not talking about performance motorcycle or touring motorcycles which are available today. In those days, that was the best you could do. So here comes the HP part of it. So what that says is actually power of the motorcycle's engine. That means it converts energy in its cylinders at the rate of 8 horsepower. Okay, so you can easily imagine where the name horsepower comes from. When James Watt originally invented the steam engine, the first application for the steam engine was in mining. Okay, and in have I spelled it correctly? Yeah. So in mining, what they used to use this for is when they have these deep mining shafts where people were working, naturally, because of seepage, water would start to fill in. Okay, and the water would have to be constantly pumped out if the people below had to continue working. Otherwise, then they would have to get out or they will drown. The way in which this was done in those days is by actually using horses and drawing the water out. Okay, so they'd use teams of horses to pull the water out, and that is the way in which they used to drain the mines. So the first application for the steam engine was when James Watt wanted to market his engine, was to use it in this application. And naturally for him to tell them, if somebody has to invest in buying a steam engine in order to drain their mines, what he would need to know is that how many buckets of water can I pull out? How much water can I pull out per hour? Okay, and that depends, because whether that is enough or it is not enough depends upon how much seepage of water you are having. So naturally then the next best thing to say was, how many horses will my engine replace? Okay, so in that way then a calculation could be made about how many horsepower engines should I purchase so that my job gets done. So that is from where this concept of horsepower in terms of power was invented. Now, over a long period of time, and if you just Google horsepower, you will get a lot of different conversions. In the modern times, once we figured out this way of doing it, so that we now talk about power in terms of watts, naturally the horsepower got converted into watts. But in industry, we still use horsepower to talk in terms of the power of engines. Not just motorcycle or automobile engines, we also talk about it in terms of engines that are used in agriculture for irrigation purposes. Those pumps are also referred to in terms of horsepowers. We also refer to engines that are used in terms of generators, also measured in terms of horsepower. So horsepower, although it's an old archaic term, it continues to be used in industry to say what is the power of modern engines. So the current conversion that we use, and this is just a set piece, you just have to remember it. There is nothing else, there is no derivation or anything that is required for it. All you need to know is 1 horsepower is equal to 746 watts. This, of course, is just one of the conversions. There are, like for example, I think in automobile industry, we also use something called as BHP, brake horsepower, and that has a different conversion. This conversion is not the conversion for the BHP, but we don't need to worry about it because we are only concerned in terms of what the syllabus says. So for that, we just have to remember that 1 horsepower is equal to 746 watts. So with that, we come to cover even that particular unit of power, and there is a table that is given over there, the difference between work and play. And then there is a small section on energy, what are the different kinds of energies that are there. That we will take it up in the following classes.